A man is violently slammed onto the cold linoleum of a grocery store, a police officer's knee digging sharply into his spine. The smug cop thought he was taking down a common street criminal. He had no idea he had just assaulted a sitting federal judge. And the security cameras caught every second. Sunday mornings in the affluent suburb of Oak Ridge were usually defined by a quiet, predictable tranquility. For Honorable Robert Harrison, a United States District Judge with 30 years of impeccable legal service, Sundays were his sanctuary. In his courtroom, Judge Harrison was a formidable presence, a man draped in black robes, known for his piercing intellect, unshakable temperament, and a commanding baritone voice that demanded absolute respect. But on the weekends, the 62-year-old shed the weight of the federal judiciary. He traded his tailored suits for a faded Georgetown University hoodie, worn-in grey sweatpants, and a battered pair of running shoes. He was just a man, enjoying the crisp autumn air and running his weekly errands. His first stop was always Oak Ridge Farms Market, a high-end, meticulously organized grocery store known for its organic produce and imported delicacies. The store was a staple of the community, bathed in warm overhead lighting and carrying the rich scent of freshly baked artisanal sourdough. Robert grabbed a shopping basket, slipping his reading glasses onto the bridge of his nose as he navigated the quiet aisles. He was specifically looking for a particular brand of aged balsamic vinegar for a family dinner he was hosting that evening. He was relaxed, his mind drifting away from the heavy dockets and complex civil rights cases that usually occupied his thoughts. 2 miles away, Officer Thomas Mitchell was cruising down Elm Street in his patrol car, his mood sour. Mitchell was a 10-year veteran of the local police force, a man whose career was stalled by a string of excessive force complaints that had miraculously never resulted in formal termination. He possessed a rigid, aggressive worldview, convinced that the wealthy suburbs were slowly being infiltrated by outsiders and criminals. Earlier that morning, a vague dispatch had come over the radio regarding a suspicious individual lingering near a pharmacy a few blocks from the Oak Ridge Farms Market. The description was tragically generic, an older black male wearing a grey hooded sweatshirt. Mitchell didn't bother waiting for further clarification. He parked his cruiser aggressively in the fire lane of the grocery store, his hand resting instinctively on his duty belt as he stepped through the sliding glass doors. His eyes scanned the checkout lanes, the bakery, and finally, the specialized grocery aisles. Mitchell operated on an arrogant assumption of authority. He didn't see citizens to protect, he saw subjects to control. Down aisle 4, Robert Harrison held a small glass bottle up to the light, reading the nutritional label. Finding it unsatisfactory, he placed it back on the shelf and reached into his sweatpants pocket to retrieve his buzzing smartphone. It was a simple, mundane movement. But to Officer Mitchell, who had just rounded the corner and locked his eyes on the Georgetown hoodie, it was all the justification he needed. "Hey, you! Keep your hands where I can see them." Mitchell's voice shattered the quiet hum of the grocery store. It was a sharp, barking command designed to induce panic. Robert turned slowly, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He looked over his shoulder, assuming the officer was yelling at someone behind him. When he realized Mitchell was marching directly toward him, hand hovering over his holstered sidearm, the judge's demeanor remained remarkably calm. Decades of dealing with hostile witnesses and aggressive defense attorneys had trained him to never match escalating energy. "Excuse me, officer?" Robert asked, his voice steady, deep and polite. "Can I help you?" "I said get your hands out of your pockets." Mitchell closed the distance, his face flushed with unearned adrenaline. "Right now." Robert slowly withdrew his empty hand from his pocket, raising both hands to chest level, palms open and visible. My hands are visible, officer. What seems to be the problem? Don't play games with me, Mitchell snapped, stepping uncomfortably close, invading Robert's personal space. He looked the older man up and down, taking in the casual, worn clothing, instantly cementing his prejudice. We got a call about a suspect matching your description casing the pharmacy down the street. What are you doing in here? I am shopping for groceries, Robert replied, his tone remaining even, though a flicker of authoritative steel began to warm his words. I have been in this store for 20 minutes. I haven't been near a pharmacy today. I decide who's telling the truth, Mitchell sneered, reaching out and grabbing Robert tightly by the bicep. I need to see some identification. Now, officer, I am perfectly willing to show you my identification, Robert said, firmly planting his feet but not pulling away from the aggressive grip. However, you are currently detaining me without reasonable articulable suspicion of a crime. Furthermore, grabbing me is entirely unnecessary. If you will let go of my arm, I will reach into my back pocket and hand you my wallet. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. He absolutely loathed when citizens used legal terminology. To him, it was a sign of insolence. Are you refusing a lawful order? Are you resisting? I'm doing neither, Robert stated calmly, his voice projecting just enough to draw the attention of the shoppers at the end of the aisle. I am calmly informing you of my rights and asking you to de-escalate this encounter. I give the orders here, not you, Mitchell barked. In Mitchell's mind, the situation was slipping out of his control. This man wasn't cowering, he wasn't stammering, and he wasn't afraid. That lack of fear infuriated the officer. Without another word of warning, Mitchell tightened his grip on Robert's arm, stepping forward to forcefully shove the older man against the shelving unit. Jars of expensive preserves rattled violently as Robert's shoulder absorbed the impact. The spark had been lit, and Officer Mitchell was about to burn his own life to the ground. The sound of shattering glass echoed through aisle 4 as a jar of raspberry preserve fell from the shelf and exploded on the pristine linoleum. Shoppers gasped, freezing in their tracks as the situation escalated from a tense conversation to unprovoked physical violence. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Officer Mitchell yelled at the top of his lungs. It was a calculated, practiced phrase. Mitchell knew that his body camera was rolling, at least he thought it was, and standard protocol dictated that creating an audio record of a suspect's resistance justified whatever force followed, but Robert Harrison wasn't resisting. He was, however, reeling from the sudden, jarring impact against the metal shelving. "Officer, I am entirely compliant. You are assaulting me," Robert said, his voice strained but remarkably devoid of panic. His mind, sharpened by years of dissecting complex use-of-force cases, was already cataloguing every single violation Mitchell was committing. Infuriated by the man's stoic composure, Mitchell decided to escalate further. He swept his heavy black boot behind Robert's right leg and threw his weight forward. The takedown was brutal and utterly unnecessary. The 62-year-old judge was slammed face first onto the hard floor. The wind knocked completely out of his lungs. Pain flared white-hot in Robert's left shoulder as Mitchell drove a heavy, armored knee directly into the small of his back, pinning him to the ground amidst the sticky, broken glass. "Put your hands behind your back," Mitchell screamed, completely ignoring the fact that his own body weight was making it physically impossible for Robert to move his arms. "I cannot move my left arm under your weight," Robert grunted, his cheek pressed against the cold floor. "You are injuring my shoulder." Mitchell violently grabbed Robert's right wrist, twisting it behind his back with agonizing force, before yanking the left arm out from under him. The harsh, metallic ratcheting sound of handcuffs, clicking tightly into place, echoed in the quiet store. The cuffs bit deeply into Robert's wrists, tightened far beyond protocol. At the end of the aisle, David Higgins, the store manager, came sprinting over. David was a mild-mannered man in his 40s who knew most of his regular customers by name. He skidded to a halt, his eyes widening in horror as he recognized the man pinned to the floor. "Hey, officer, what are you doing?" David yelled, stepping forward with his hands raised. "That's Mr. Harrison. He's a regular customer." Mitchell unclipped a canister of pepper spray from his belt and pointed it directly at the manager's face. "Back off. Step back right now, or you're going to jail for interfering with a police investigation. Back the hell up." David stumbled backward, raising his hands higher. Okay, just... He wasn't doing anything." Mitchell hauled Robert roughly to his feet by the chain of the handcuffs. Robert winced, his shoulder screaming in pain, his Georgetown hoodie torn and stained with sticky red preserves. He looked directly at David, offering a small, reassuring nod. "Do not get involved," Robert's eyes said. "I have this. Let's go, tough guy," Mitchell sneered, shoving Robert forward. The perp walk through the grocery store was a spectacle of public humiliation. Dozens of customers watched in stunned silence as the bruised, handcuffed older man was marched past the organic apples and the artisan cheese counter. Sarah, a young cashier who had rung up Robert's groceries every Sunday for 2 years, covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes. Robert held his head high. He did not look down at the floor. He met the eyes of the onlookers with quiet dignity. He was furious, a deep, righteous anger burning in his chest. But he refused to give Mitchell the satisfaction of seeing him break. He knew the law. He knew the absolute legal nightmare he was about to unleash upon this officer, the precinct, and the city. But for now, he had to survive the encounter. Mitchell shoved Robert into the back of the sweltering patrol car, slamming the heavy door shut. As Mitchell walked around to the driver's side, he casually reached up and tapped his chest. With a discreet click, he powered down his body camera. It was an old trick, one he had used a dozen times before. Camera malfunctioned during a struggle. It was the perfect excuse. Without the body camera footage, it would be his word against the word of a man he was about to book for resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. In Mitchell's world, the badge always won that argument. The drive to the precinct was tense and silent. Mitchell occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting the man in the back to beg, apologize, or start shouting obscenities. Instead, Robert simply stared out the window, his expression unreadable, his mind silently calculating the exact statutes of the Civil Rights Code that had just been shattered. Back at the grocery store, as soon as the police cruiser pulled out of the parking lot, David Higgins didn't call the police complaint line. He sprinted directly to his back office, locking the door behind him. Just 3 days prior, corporate had installed a brand new, state-of-the-art 4K security system. The cameras were small, discreet, and captured crystal-clear audio and video from every angle in the store, including a pristine, unobstructed view of aisle 4. David's hands shook as he logged into the mainframe and pulled up the timestamp. He watched the footage play out in high definition, the unprovoked aggression, the brutal takedown, the undeniable innocence of the man on the floor. David immediately hit export and saved the raw file to 3 separate secure flash drives. Officer Mitchell thought he had controlled the narrative by turning off his body camera. He had no idea that the silent, unblinking eyes of the grocery store had just sealed his fate. Meanwhile, Mitchell's cruiser pulled into the precinct Sally Port. He hauled Robert out of the back seat and marched him towards the heavy steel doors of the booking area. "All right, buddy," Mitchell mocked, completely unaware of the absolute storm about to make landfall. "Let's find out exactly who you are." The Oak Ridge Police Department booking center was a fluorescent-lit cavern of scuffed linoleum, smelling faintly of stale coffee, ammonia, and nervous sweat. It was a place designed to strip individuals of their dignity the moment they crossed the threshold. Officer Thomas Mitchell pushed through the heavy steel double doors, hauling Robert by the chain of his handcuffs. Robert's left shoulder throbbed with a sickening, persistent rhythm, and a thin line of blood had dried along his cheekbone from where his face had been ground into the grocery store floor. Yet, despite his torn Georgetown hoodie and the sticky residue of raspberry preserves staining his clothes, his posture remained rigidly upright. Behind the elevated booking desk sat Desk Sergeant Paul Jenkins, a 20-year veteran who was 2 years away from a quiet pension. Jenkins was absent-mindedly typing a petty theft report, chewing on a plastic stir stick. He barely looked up as Mitchell shoved Robert toward the metal bench bolted to the concrete wall. "Got a live one today, Tommy?" Sergeant Jenkins asked, his eyes still glued to his computer monitor. "Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, interfering with a police investigation, and suspected casing of a pharmacy," Mitchell rattled off, his voice dripping with triumphant adrenaline. He leaned against the high desk, tapping his knuckles on the laminate surface. "Guy thought he could get mouthy with me. Refused a lawful order to provide ID, had to take him down to get the cuffs on him. My body cam glitched out during the scuffle, but it's a cut-and-dry obstruction charge." Robert sat on the cold metal bench. He did not shout. He did not demand a lawyer. He simply waited, his eyes locked onto Sergeant Jenkins. "All right, let's process him," Jenkins sighed, finally hitting print on his report and turning his attention to the suspect. He stood up and looked over the elevated desk. When his eyes landed on Robert, Jenkins frowned. This didn't look like a pharmacy thief. This looked like an older gentleman who had been unnecessarily brutalized. But Jenkins had learned long ago not to question Mitchell's arrests out in the open. "You got his wallet, Mitchell?" "Yeah, fished it out of his back pocket before I shoved him in the cruiser," Mitchell said, tossing a worn, handsome leather bifold onto the desk. It landed with a heavy, distinct thud. Sergeant Jenkins picked up the wallet. It was noticeably heavier than a standard billfold. He flipped it open to pull out the driver's license, but his fingers froze. His breath hitched in his throat. Directly opposite the driver's license, set behind a clear protective window, was a heavy, gleaming gold badge. Above the badge was a laminated credential card featuring the seal of the United States. Jenkins read the bold black text printed across the top of the card. United States District Court, Eastern District. Beneath it, the name, Honorable Robert T. Harrison, Chief United States District Judge. The plastic stir stick fell out of Jenkins's mouth and hit the floor. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of ash gray. A cold, absolute dread pooled in his stomach. He looked from the leather wallet in his trembling hands down to the bleeding, bruised, handcuffed man sitting on the metal bench. He recognized the face now. He had seen it in the local paper when a major federal corruption ring had been dismantled the previous year. "Sergeant?" Mitchell asked, noticing the sudden, terrifying silence. "What's the matter? Guy got a warrant?" "Mitchell," Jenkins whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the word. "Mitchell, what have you done?" "What are you talking about?" Mitchell asked, his brow furrowing in irritation. He reached for the wallet, but Jenkins snatched it away, his eyes wide with unfiltered panic. "Get the keys," Jenkins commanded, his voice suddenly rising to a frantic shout that echoed off the concrete walls. "Get the keys and take those cuffs off him, right now." "Sergeant, he's under arrest for—" "I don't give a damn what you think he's under arrest for," Jenkins roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. Unlock those handcuffs immediately, or I will personally throw you in a holding cell. Do it." Confused and angered by the sudden insubordination from a superior officer, Mitchell unclipped the universal handcuff key from his belt and marched over to Robert. He aggressively grabbed Robert's arms, causing the older man to wince sharply as the metal teeth were disengaged. The cuffs fell away, leaving deep, angry purple indents in Robert's wrists. Sergeant Jenkins practically sprinted around the desk, his heavy duty boots loud against the floor. He stopped 3 feet from Robert and stood at a rigid attention. "Your Honor," Jenkins said, his voice shaking, "I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am. Do you need an ambulance?" Mitchell froze. The universe seemed to stop spinning. He stared at Jenkins, then turned slowly to look at the man in the torn sweatshirt. "Your Honor." Robert slowly brought his arms to the front, rubbing his bruised wrists. He didn't look at Mitchell. He looked directly at Sergeant Jenkins. "Thank you, Sergeant. I do not need an ambulance, but I will require a department medic to properly document my injuries, specifically my left rotator cuff, my right knee, and the lacerations on my face and wrists." Robert stood up. Without the handcuffs, his posture shifted. The casual aura of the Georgetown hoodie vanished, replaced by the crushing, authoritative weight of a man who commanded federal courtrooms. He finally turned his gaze to Officer Mitchell. The look in Robert's eyes wasn't angry. It was analytical, cold, and utterly devoid of mercy. "You," Mitchell stammered, his arrogant bravado instantly evaporating, replaced by a cold sweat. "You're a judge." "I am the Chief Judge of the United States District Court," Robert stated, his baritone voice echoing through the silent booking room like a gavel strike. "And you, officer, have just committed false imprisonment, assault, battery, and a severe deprivation of my civil rights under the color of law. Sergeant Jenkins, please call Captain Thompson. Wake him up if you have to. Tell him the chief federal judge is currently bleeding in his booking room." Mitchell backed away, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He realized, with crushing clarity, that he hadn't just made a mistake. He had just ended his own life as he knew it. By 8 a.m. the following Monday, the Oak Ridge Police Department was a fortress under siege. The atmosphere inside the Chief of Police's office was suffocatingly tense. Chief Bradley Hayes, a man who had spent 3 decades trying to keep his department's reputation clean, sat behind his heavy oak desk, rubbing his temples. Pacing the floor was Captain Richard Thompson, his uniform immaculate, but his face drawn with stress. Sitting in a hard-backed chair across from the chief was Officer Thomas Mitchell. Mitchell looked exhausted, having spent the entire night frantically trying to contact union representatives. Beside him sat a slick, high-priced union lawyer named Peter Sterling. "Chief," Sterling began, his tone smooth and placating, "we are dealing with an unfortunate misunderstanding. Officer Mitchell was responding to a vague dispatch. The subject matched the description, was acting suspiciously, and became combative when approached. It is a tragedy that the subject happened to be Judge Harrison, but my client's body camera malfunctioned during the struggle, leaving us with a textbook he said scenario. Given the judge's clear bias, we believe the charges against my client should be handled internally with a standard 2-week paid administrative suspension." Mitchell nodded vigorously. "He was non-compliant, Chief. He refused a lawful order. I used standard department-approved control techniques. The injuries were accidental." Chief Hayes stopped rubbing his temples. He looked at Mitchell with an expression of profound disgust. "A he said scenario?" Hayes asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Standard control techniques?" "Yes, sir," Mitchell lied, clinging desperately to the narrative he had fabricated in the cruiser. Hayes reached forward and tapped the spacebar on his keyboard. A large, flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall sprang to life. At the exact same time, Mitchell had been turning off his body camera the previous afternoon. David Higgins, the manager at Oak Ridge Farms Market, had been exporting the store's 4K security footage. Higgins hadn't just saved it for the police. Knowing the reputation of the local precinct, Higgins had securely emailed the file directly to the regional office of the FBI and the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The video playing on the screen was devastating in its clarity. It was high-definition, color footage from directly above aisle 4. Crucially, the new security system also recorded audio. The room sat in deathly silence as the footage played. They heard Robert's calm, respectful voice. They heard Mitchell's aggressive, barking commands. They watched in crystal-clear detail as Robert raised his hands in absolute compliance. And then they watched as Mitchell unprovokedly shoved a 62-year-old federal judge against a metal shelf, swept his leg, and drove a knee into his spine with enough force to shatter glass. Mitchell's face turned the color of chalk. The breath left his lungs. The union lawyer, Sterling, slowly closed his notepad, the color draining from his face as well. He knew instantly that there was no defending this. "Your body camera didn't malfunction, Thomas," Chief Hayes said, his voice laced with venom. "We checked the hardware logs. You manually powered it down exactly 4 seconds after you shoved him into the back of your cruiser. You thought you were in the blind spot. You thought you were untouchable." Before Mitchell could utter a single word of defense, the heavy oak door to the chief's office swung open. 2 men in dark, tailored suits walked in. Their badges were clipped to their belts. "Chief Hayes," the lead man said, flashing a credential case. "Special Agent Caldwell, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're here for Officer Mitchell." "On what grounds?" Mitchell shrieked, his panic finally breaking through his paralysis as he leaped out of his chair. "This is a local disciplinary matter." "Not anymore," Agent Caldwell said, pulling a pair of heavy, federal-issue handcuffs from his belt. "Thomas Mitchell, you are under arrest for violating 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Furthermore, the United States Attorney General has authorized a full, sweeping investigation into your entire past service record. Every use of force report you have ever filed is being subpoenaed as we speak." "You can't do this. I'm a police officer. I have union protection." Mitchell screamed, stepping back until he hit the wall. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Caldwell ordered, his voice cold and indifferent. "Your union doesn't have jurisdiction in federal court, and unfortunately for you, your criminal trial will be held in the Eastern District. I hear the judges there are particularly unsympathetic to dirty cops." Mitchell was spun around, and the cold steel clicked shut around his wrists. It was the exact same sound he had forced upon Judge Harrison less than 24 hours earlier. As he was marched out of the chief's office, past rows of his fellow officers who turned their backs on him in disgust, the reality of his situation crushed him. Judge Robert Harrison had not merely filed a complaint. He had utilized his profound knowledge of the legal system to trigger a massive Department of Justice intervention. Mitchell's career wasn't just over, his freedom was gone. 6 months later, Thomas Mitchell would be convicted in a federal courtroom, standing before one of Judge Harrison's close colleagues, and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Furthermore, the DOJ investigation unearthed a pattern of abuse that led to a federal consent decree, fundamentally restructuring the Oak Ridge Police Department and purging its toxic elements. Mitchell thought he was targeting a vulnerable, nameless man in a grocery store. Instead, he had assaulted the very embodiment of the law itself, and the law had answered back. Talk about the ultimate dose of instant karma. Officer Mitchell thought his badge made him a king, but he forgot that even kings have to answer to the law. Judge Harrison didn't just get revenge. He cleaned up an entire corrupt police department with one brilliant, calculated legal strike. What did you think of the grocery store manager's genius move to save the footage?